I'm Elsie, 21. My dad just handed me disinheritance papers as my birthday present while my entire family laughed and said he'd rather have no daughter than a failure like me. I took the papers, grabbed my suitcase, and walked out without a word. But a week later, they were all at my hotel door begging when the world discovered who I really was. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt completely misunderstood by your family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Let me take you back to where this all started because, honestly, the irony is almost too perfect. High school. Springfield High's drama department, to be exact. Picture this awkward 17-year-old with wild, curly hair and dreams bigger than her small Ohio hometown could contain. That was me, living and breathing theater like it was oxygen. I spent every afternoon in that musty auditorium, memorizing lines, painting sets, and pretending I was someone else entirely. My parents would actually show up to my performances back then. Dad in his pressed khakis and polo shirt, Mom clutching her purse like someone might steal it in a high school auditorium. They'd clap politely when I took my bow, and afterward they'd say things like, "You were wonderful, sweetheart," and "such a natural performer." For a brief, shining moment, I thought they got it. I thought they understood that this wasn't just some hobby or phase. This was my calling, my purpose, the thing that made me feel most alive. But then senior year happened, and suddenly every conversation turned into a college planning session. "Elsie, you need to think practically about your future," Mom would say, setting down pamphlets for law schools like they were peace offerings. "Acting is a nice hobby, but you need something stable, something respectable." Dad would nod along, adding his own brand of practical wisdom. "The entertainment industry is brutal, honey. 99% of actors never make it. You're too smart to waste your talents on something so uncertain." I tried explaining that uncertainty didn't scare me. I tried showing them articles about successful actors who'd started with nothing, statistics about the growing film and television industry, examples of how theater training actually made you a better communicator in any field. But they'd already made up their minds. In their vision of my future, I was wearing a business suit and carrying a briefcase, not standing on a stage pouring my heart out for strangers. The compromise they offered felt like a death sentence disguised as generosity. Go to college, get your degree in something practical, and then if you still want to pursue acting, you'll have something to fall back on. Something to fall back on. As if my dreams were inherently designed to fail. So there I was, 18 years old and filling out applications for pre-law programs, because it made my parents proud, because it seemed like the responsible thing to do, because I was too young and too scared to bet everything on myself. The acceptance letter from NYU arrived on a Tuesday. My parents celebrated like I'd just won the lottery. Mom called all her friends, Dad took me out for a congratulatory dinner, and everyone kept saying how proud they were of me for making such a mature decision. I smiled and nodded and played the part of the grateful daughter. But inside, I felt like I was attending my own funeral. The girl who wanted to be an actress was being buried alive under expectations and practical considerations and other people's definitions of success. Little did any of us know that this was just the beginning of the story. And trust me, the beginning was the easy part. New York University's law building looked exactly like what you'd expect from a place designed to crush dreams and replace them with billable hours. Imposing limestone facade, windows that seemed to judge you as you walked past, and students who all looked like they'd been bred specifically for corporate success. I lasted exactly 3 weeks before I started sneaking away to auditions. It wasn't planned, really. I was walking back from civil procedure class, feeling like my soul was slowly being extracted through my ears, when I saw a flyer on a coffee shop bulletin board. Casting call, new drama series seeks fresh faces. Something about it called to me like a lighthouse in a storm. Most of the other law students spent their free time studying or networking at mixers with names like Future Leaders in Corporate Law. I spent mine riding the subway to cramped offices in Midtown, waiting in lines with dozens of other hopefuls, and remembering what it felt like to actually want something. The auditions were terrible at first. I was rusty, nervous, still thinking like a pre-law student instead of an actress. I'd walk into these rooms with casting directors who could smell the doubt on me from across the table. But slowly, with each rejection, I started remembering who I used to be. I started booking small stuff first. Background work, one-line roles, the kind of parts where you're mostly furniture that occasionally speaks. My parents thought I was studying extra hard because I'd come home exhausted and covered in makeup that I'd forgotten to wash off. Theater appreciation class, I'd explain, which wasn't technically a lie. The real breakthrough came during my second semester. I'd gotten a callback for something called Riverside Heights, a teen drama that was being pitched as the next big thing. The casting director, a woman named Sandra, with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue, kept bringing me back for different scenes. "You have something," she told me after the fourth callback. Raw, but definitely something. Can you come back tomorrow? I nodded so enthusiastically I probably looked like a bobblehead. What I didn't mention was that tomorrow was my constitutional law final exam. I called in sick, told Professor Williams I had food poisoning and needed to reschedule. Then I showed up to that final callback with everything I had, every ounce of talent and desperation and hope I'd been storing up since high school. 2 days later, Sandra called. Congratulations, Elsie. Welcome to Riverside Heights. You're our new Rebecca Morrison. Rebecca Morrison, the troubled but brilliant daughter of the town's most prominent family, whose secrets would drive half the show's storylines. A lead role. An actual, honest-to-God lead role on a show that networks were already fighting over. I hung up the phone and immediately burst into tears, right there in the middle of the NYU library. Happy tears, terrified tears. What the hell am I about to do, tears? Because I knew, even before I dialed my parents' number, that this would change everything, that there was no way to play both sides anymore. No way to keep pretending I was the dutiful law student while secretly building the acting career they'd forbidden me to want. The phone rang 3 times before Dad picked up. Hey, sweetheart, how are classes going? Dad, I said, my voice already shaking. I need to tell you something important. Have you ever experienced that moment when you know you're about to drop a bomb that will change everything? That's exactly where I was, standing in my tiny NYU dorm room, phone pressed to my ear, about to tell my parents that their worst nightmare had just come true. I got a part, Dad. Not just any part. The lead role in a television series that's being picked up by a major network. Silence. The kind of silence that stretches so long you start wondering if the call dropped. Finally, Dad's voice, carefully controlled. Elsie, we've talked about this. You're in school for law. This acting thing is a distraction. It's not a distraction anymore, Dad. It's my career. They want to sign me to a 3-year contract. We start filming in 2 weeks. 2 weeks? Mom's voice joined the conversation, sharp with panic. Elsie, you have finals. You have your whole second semester ahead of you. You can't just abandon your education for some TV show that might get canceled after 6 episodes. I took a deep breath, knowing that what I said next would detonate whatever relationship I had left with my family. I'm dropping out of law school. The explosion was immediate and devastating. Absolutely not. Dad's voice cut through the phone like a blade. We are not paying for you to throw your life away on some Hollywood fantasy. We raised you better than this, Mom added, her voice thick with disappointment. We gave you every opportunity, every advantage, and this is how you repay us? I tried to explain what this meant, what kind of opportunity I'd been given, how casting directors had told me I was special, how the writers had already started developing storylines specifically around my character, how this wasn't just some pipe dream but an actual, legitimate career path opening up in front of me. But they weren't hearing me. They were hearing their worst fears confirmed, that their daughter was choosing uncertainty over stability, dreams over practicality, art over respectability. If you walk away from law school for this nonsense, Dad said, his voice cold in a way I'd never heard before, don't expect us to support you when it falls apart. Fine, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. I won't. The conversation deteriorated from there, Mom crying about how they'd failed as parents, Dad lecturing about responsibility and mature decisions, me, standing my ground for the first time in my life, refusing to back down even as I felt my family slipping away from me. Elsie, Mom said finally, her voice hollow, if you do this, if you really throw away everything we've worked for, don't expect to come crying to us when reality hits. I won't, I repeated. We're serious, Dad added. You're making an adult decision, so you can live with adult consequences. Don't call us when you're broke and homeless and wondering why you gave up a promising legal career for something so frivolous. The line went dead. I sat on my narrow dorm bed, staring at my phone, waiting for them to call back and say they didn't mean it, that they supported me, that they were proud of me for taking such a big risk. The call never came. 2 days later, I withdrew from NYU. 3 days after that, I was on a plane to Vancouver, where Riverside Heights would film its first season. 8 months of 16-hour days, of learning lines and hitting marks and becoming someone I'd never imagined I could be. The girl who left New York was scared and uncertain. The woman who would eventually come back was about to learn exactly what her family really thought of her dreams. You know what's funny about cutting all contact with someone? How loud the silence becomes. For the first few weeks of filming, I'd catch myself reaching for my phone to call my parents about everything. Great day on set. I wanted to share it. Tough scene that made me cry. I needed their support. Learning something new about the craft I loved. I craved their validation. But every time I'd start to dial their number, I'd remember Dad's voice. Don't call us when you're broke and homeless. So I didn't call. And more importantly, They didn't call me. Radio silence. Complete and absolute radio silence from the people who'd raised me, who'd supposedly loved me unconditionally, who'd taught me that family was the most important thing in the world. Turns out, family was only the most important thing as long as you did exactly what they wanted. The first month of filming was rough. Not because the work was hard, though it was, but because I was learning to exist without the safety net I'd taken for granted my entire life. No parents to vent to after a bad day, no family group chat full of encouragement and inside jokes, no one checking in to make sure I was eating enough or sleeping well. I was 21 years old and completely on my own for the first time, in a foreign country, doing the most challenging and exciting work of my life, and I had no one to share it with. Well, almost no one. The cast became a kind of makeshift family. Marcus, who played my on-screen brother, took me under his wing like a real big sibling. Sarah, our show's veteran actor, gave me master classes in technique between takes. Even the crew started looking out for me. The green kid from Ohio who clearly had no idea what she was doing but was trying her heart out anyway. "Your parents know what you're doing out here?" Marcus asked one day during lunch break. We were sitting outside our trailers enjoying the rare Vancouver sunshine. "They know," I said carefully. "They're just not thrilled about it." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Not thrilled about their daughter landing a lead role on a network TV show? What did they want you to be, a brain surgeon? Lawyer, actually?" He laughed, then stopped when he realized I wasn't laughing with him. "Wait, you're serious? They're upset about this?" I nodded, not trusting my voice to stay steady if I tried to explain the whole story. "That's insane," he said, shaking his head. "My mom tells everyone in our neighborhood that I'm on TV. She DVRs my old commercials. Your parents are missing out on being proud of something incredible." That was the thing that hurt most, actually. Not that they disagreed with my choice, but that they couldn't see what everyone else saw. That I was good at this, that I belonged here, that I was building something meaningful and beautiful with my life. The worst part was wondering if maybe they were right. Maybe I was delusional. Maybe I was throwing away something valuable for something worthless. Maybe their silence was just them waiting for me to come to my senses and apologize for being so foolish. Those doubts got louder during the harder days, when I couldn't remember my lines, or when a scene wasn't working, or when I felt like an imposter surrounded by real actors who actually knew what they were doing. But then something beautiful would happen. A scene would click perfectly, or I'd nail an emotional moment that had been giving me trouble, or a director would pull me aside to tell me how impressed they were with my growth, and I'd remember why I'd chosen this path in the first place. 8 months. That's how long I went without speaking to my family. 8 months of the most transformative, challenging, exciting period of my life, and they missed all of it. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was building a new life with new people who actually supported my dreams. But deep down, I kept hoping that when the show aired, when they saw what I'd accomplished, when the rest of the world recognized what I was doing, maybe they'd come around. Maybe they'd remember that they used to be proud of me. Maybe they'd want to be part of my life again. I was about to find out exactly how naive that hope was. Filming wrapped on a Tuesday in early November, 8 months after I'd last heard my parents' voices. As the crew packed up equipment and actors exchanged contact information and promises to stay in touch, I realized I was facing a problem I hadn't anticipated: what to do next. Most of the cast was heading back to Los Angeles to wait for news about a second season pickup. A few were going home to visit family before the show aired in January. Everyone had somewhere to go, people waiting for them, plans that made sense. I had a small apartment I'd been paying for but barely living in, and parents who'd made it crystal clear they didn't want to hear from me. "You coming to the wrap party tonight?" Sarah asked, slipping her arm through mine as we walked toward the parking lot. "Wouldn't miss it," I said, forcing brightness into my voice that I didn't feel. The wrap party was everything you'd expect from a group of 20-somethings who'd just spent 8 months working 18-hour days together. Loud music, cheap wine, and everyone talking over each other about their favorite moments from the season. For a few hours, I managed to forget about the growing anxiety in my chest about what came next. "So what's your plan?" Marcus asked during a quieter moment. We were standing on the hotel balcony, looking out over Vancouver's skyline. "Plan?" I laughed, but it came out hollow. "That's optimistic. I'm thinking I'll head back to my apartment, wait for the show to air, and see what happens next." "What about Christmas? You going home?" The question hit me like a physical blow. Home. Where exactly was home when your family had essentially disowned you for pursuing your dreams? "Maybe," I said vaguely, still figuring that out. But as the weeks passed and December approached, the idea started taking root in my mind. What if I did go home? What if I showed up for Christmas and tried to bridge the gap that had grown between us? What if 8 months had been enough time for them to miss me, to regret the harsh words, to realize that family should support each other even when they disagreed? The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I'd be going home as a success, not a failure. I had a television show about to air, a career that was actually taking off, proof that my dreams weren't as foolish as they'd claimed. Maybe this was exactly what we needed to heal the rift between us. I started making plans without really admitting to myself that's what I was doing. Booked a flight to Ohio for December 20th, my birthday. Researched hotels near my parents' house, just in case things were still tense and I needed somewhere to stay. Even started shopping for Christmas presents, imagining their faces when they saw how well I was doing. "You sure about this?" Marcus asked when I told him my plan. We were having lunch in LA, where I'd been staying temporarily while figuring out my next move. "It's Christmas," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Family is supposed to be together at Christmas. Family is supposed to support each other's dreams too," he pointed out gently. "But yours kicked you to the curb when you needed them most." I knew he was right. Logically, I understood that nothing about their behavior suggested they'd suddenly change their minds about my career choices. But there was this stubborn part of me that refused to believe my parents could really be that cold, that unforgiving, that incapable of growth. They'd raised me. They'd loved me for 21 years. Surely that had to count for something. So I booked the ticket, packed my suitcase with carefully chosen outfits that looked successful, but not showy. Practiced conversations in my head where I'd explain what the last 8 months had been like, how much I'd grown, how right this path had turned out to be. I even wrote them a letter that I never sent, full of everything I wanted to say about how much I'd missed them, how sorry I was that we'd grown apart, how much I wanted them to be proud of me again. Looking back, I can see exactly how naive I was being, how desperately I wanted to believe that blood was thicker than disappointment, that love was stronger than wounded pride, that time could heal the kind of fundamental disconnection that happens when people simply can't understand each other. But at 21, I still believed in happy endings. I still thought that showing up with good intentions and a successful career would be enough to fix what had been broken between us. I was about to learn exactly how wrong I was. The flight from LAX to Columbus was 3.5 hours of pure anxiety. I spent the entire time rehearsing what I'd say when I saw them, how I'd explain the last 8 months, how I'd make them understand that I'd made the right choice. By the time the plane touched down, I'd convinced myself this was going to be the reunion I'd been dreaming of since the day I'd hung up on them. December 20th in Ohio was exactly what you'd expect. Gray sky, bitter cold, and that particular kind of winter bleakness that makes everything look like it's been drained of color. I grabbed my suitcase from baggage claim and looked around for my parents, even though I hadn't told them I was coming. Surprise, right? Show up on my birthday with proof that I'd made something of myself, and surely they'd be so happy to see me that all the hurt feelings would just melt away. Nobody was there, obviously, because nobody knew I was coming. I took a taxi to their house, watching familiar neighborhoods scroll past the windows and feeling that strange mix of nostalgia and dread that comes with returning to a place that used to be home but doesn't quite feel like it anymore. The house looked exactly the same. Same beige siding, same perfectly manicured lawn, same seasonal wreath that Mom changed out religiously every few weeks. Dad's car was in the driveway next to Mom's SUV, which meant they were both home. Perfect. Time for the grand reunion. I paid the taxi driver and stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Suitcase handle in one hand, car keys to a car I'd sold months ago clutched uselessly in the other. This was it. The moment where everything went back to normal, where we became a family again, where they finally understood what I'd been trying to tell them all along. I walked up the front steps and knocked on the door, my heart hammering so hard I was sure the neighbors could hear it. The door opened, and there was Mom, looking older and more tired than I remembered. For a split second, her face lit up with pure joy at seeing me. For just one beautiful moment, I thought I'd been right about everything. Then her expression shifted, became guarded, careful. "Elsie, what are you doing here?" "It's my birthday," I said, trying to smile. "I thought maybe we could talk. I've missed you guys so much." She glanced over her shoulder, then back at me. "You should have called first. I wanted it to be a surprise." My voice sounded smaller than I'd intended. "Can I come in? It's freezing out here." Another pause, another glance over her shoulder. Then reluctantly, she stepped aside. The house smelled like cinnamon and vanilla, the same candles Mom burned every winter for as long as I could remember. Christmas decorations covered every surface. The same ornaments I'd grown up with, the same artificial tree in the same corner of the living room. Everything was exactly the same, except for the family photos on the mantle. 8 months worth of pictures, vacations, holidays, family gatherings, and I wasn't in a single one. "Your father's in the living room," Mom said carefully. "We have company, on my birthday, family company, based on the voices I could hear from the other room." I followed her into the living room, where my entire extended family was gathered around the coffee table laughing at something Dad had just said. Aunts, uncles, cousins, even my grandparents. Everyone I'd grown up celebrating birthdays and holidays with. The conversation stopped the moment I walked in. Not gradually, not politely. It just cut off like someone had hit a mute button. "Well," Dad said after a moment that lasted about 17 hours, "look who decided to grace us with her presence." The tone was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. Where was the joy at seeing me? Where were the questions about how I'd been, what I'd been doing, whether I was happy and healthy and safe? Where was the love that was supposed to exist regardless of our disagreements? "Hi, Dad," I said, setting my suitcase down by the door. "I missed you too." Standing in that living room, surrounded by my entire family but feeling more alone than I'd felt in 8 months of actual solitude, I finally understood what people meant when they talked about the temperature of a room dropping. Literally everyone was staring at me. Not with curiosity or joy or even anger, with something much worse. Disappointment mixed with pity, like I was a cautionary tale walking into their comfortable, predictable gathering. "How long are you staying?" Mom asked, and the question sounded more like she was calculating how much inconvenience I'd cause than actual interest in spending time with me. "I have a return flight on January 2nd, I said, still hoping someone would say they were glad to see me. "January 2nd? Aunt Linda's voice carried that particular tone women use when they want to sound concerned but are actually just being nosy. "That's quite a long visit. Are you between jobs?" Between jobs. Like what I'd been doing was temporary employment at a grocery store, not the career-defining opportunity I'd been working toward my entire adult life. "Actually, I just finished filming the first season of a television show," I said, trying to inject some pride into my voice. "It's going to air next month." The silence that followed was somehow even worse than before. Finally, my cousin Tom spoke up. "Oh, one of those reality shows?" "No, it's a drama series. I play one of the lead characters." I looked around the room, hoping to see even a flicker of interest or pride. "It's called Riverside Heights. It's going to be on Tuesday nights." "Huh," said Uncle Bob, the family's self-appointed expert on everything. "Never heard of it." Of course he'd never heard of it. It hadn't aired yet. But pointing that out would only make me sound defensive, so I just smiled and nodded. "Well," Dad said, standing up from his recliner with the kind of deliberate movement that suggested this conversation was over, "I'm sure that's very exciting for you. We were just finishing up dinner. Mom can probably find you some leftovers if you're hungry." Leftovers. Not, "let me set another place at the table," or "we saved you a spot," or "how wonderful that you made it home for your birthday." Leftovers. "Actually," I said, my voice staying steady through sheer force of will, "I was hoping we could all spend some time together. It's been 8 months since we talked, and I have so much to tell you about what I've been doing." The look that passed between my parents could have frozen water. Quick, efficient communication that said volumes about conversations they'd had in my absence. "Elsie," Mom said carefully, "we're having a nice, quiet family evening. Maybe tomorrow would be better for catching up." Family evening. I was their daughter, their flesh and blood, and somehow I wasn't included in family. That's when it hit me. This wasn't an awkward reunion that would improve once we all relaxed. This wasn't a misunderstanding that could be cleared up with good intentions and honest conversation. This was deliberate exclusion. They weren't surprised to see me. They were inconvenienced by me. "You know what?" I said, reaching for my suitcase. "You're right. I should have called first." "Where are you going?" Mom asked, but not like she was worried about me, like she was worried about how it would look to the rest of the family if their daughter left immediately after arriving. "There's a hotel downtown. I'll stay there and give you some space to enjoy your family evening." I made it to the front door before Dad spoke up. "Elsie." I turned around, hopeful despite everything that maybe he was going to say something kind, something that acknowledged how much courage it had taken for me to come home. "Happy birthday," he said. But the words were flat, perfunctory, like he was checking an obligation off a list. I drove away in the taxi that was still waiting, because somewhere in my subconscious I must have known this was how things would go, and watched my childhood home disappear behind me. The house where I'd grown up, where I'd felt safe and loved and valued, was now just another building full of people who didn't want me there. The hotel room was small and generic and absolutely perfect for what I needed, which was a place to fall apart in private before I figured out what to do next. Tomorrow was my birthday, 22 years old, and I'd finally learned exactly where I stood with the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. It wasn't where I'd hoped to be. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls from my mom and a text that just said, "Come to the house. We need to talk." Honestly, after yesterday's welcome, I almost didn't go. but there was still this stubborn part of me that hoped maybe they'd realized how cold they'd been. Maybe they wanted to apologize and start over. I should have trusted my first instinct and stayed at the hotel. When I arrived at the house, that same taxi driver who was probably wondering about my life choices by now, I could hear voices from the living room before I even rang the doorbell. The same extended family from yesterday, plus a few additional voices I couldn't identify. Mom answered the door immediately, like she'd been watching for me. "Thank goodness you came. Everyone's here. Everyone's here." For what, exactly? I followed her into the living room where the scene from yesterday had somehow gotten even more awkward. More family members, more serious faces, more of that particular energy that happens when a group of people have been talking about you and suddenly you walk into the room. "Sit down, sweetheart," Dad said, gesturing to the single empty chair in the center of the room, like I was about to be interviewed for a job I definitely wasn't going to get. I remained standing. Something about the setup felt wrong, too formal, too much like an intervention. "Is everything okay?" I asked, looking around at faces that ranged from uncomfortable to downright hostile. "We need to discuss your situation," Dad said. The word situation came out like he was talking about a problem that needed to be solved. "My situation?" Uncle Bob cleared his throat. "Elsie, we're all concerned about the path you've chosen. This acting thing isn't sustainable, and it's time you faced reality." Acting thing. 8 months of the hardest, most fulfilling work of my life, reduced to a thing. "We've been talking," Mom added, "and we think it would be best if you came home, re-enrolled in law school, and put this Hollywood phase behind you." Hollywood phase? Like my career was equivalent to a teenager dyeing their hair blue or getting a questionable tattoo. "I appreciate your concern," I said carefully, "but I'm not changing my mind. This isn't a phase. It's my life." The temperature in the room dropped another few degrees. "In that case," Dad said, reaching for an envelope on the coffee table, "we have something for you." He stood up, walked over to where I was still standing by the entrance to the room, and handed me the envelope with a formality that felt more like a business transaction than a family moment. "What is this?" I asked, though something deep in my stomach already knew I didn't want to find out. "Open it," he said simply. My hands were shaking as I tore open the envelope. Inside were several official-looking documents with law firm letterheads and my name at the top. It took me a moment to understand what I was reading, to process the legal language into something that made sense. Disinheritance papers. Formal, legal, notarized disinheritance papers. "Consider it a birthday present," Dad said, and I swear I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. The room erupted in laughter. Not uncomfortable chuckles or nervous titters, but actual laughter. My aunt was practically giggling, my cousins were smirking, and my uncle was shaking his head like this was the funniest thing he'd seen all year. And my father, the man who had taught me to ride a bike and helped me with my homework and told me I could be anything I wanted to be, looked me straight in the eye and said, "I'd rather have no daughter than have a failure like you." The words hit me like a physical blow. Not just the cruelty of them, but the finality. There was no anger in his voice, no heat that might cool down later. Just cold, calculated dismissal. I looked around the room at these people who shared my DNA, who had been at every birthday party and Christmas morning of my childhood, who were now laughing at my humiliation like it was entertainment. And something inside me just broke. Not in a dramatic, sobbing way, but more like a door slamming shut on a part of my life that was now officially over. I folded the papers carefully, slipped them back into the envelope, and picked up my suitcase. Nobody moved to stop me. Nobody tried to take it back or say they didn't mean it. I walked to the front door, opened it, and stepped outside into the December cold. Behind me, the laughter continued. I got into the taxi, gave the driver the hotel address, and we pulled away from the house where I'd grown up. I didn't look back. There was nothing left, Tosi. The hotel room became my entire world for the next week. Room 237 at the Holiday Inn downtown Springfield. Not exactly the glamorous post-filming retreat I'd imagined when I booked my return flight, but it was mine, and nobody there was laughing at my life choices. I spread those disinheritance papers out on the small desk and read them over and over, like maybe the words would change if I studied them hard enough. But no, there it was in black and white legal language. Elsie Margaret Thompson was no longer considered a child of Robert and Margaret Thompson, effective immediately. No inheritance, no family connection, no safety net of any kind. 22 years old, officially orphaned by choice rather than tragedy. You know what's weird about being completely alone for the first time in your life? How quiet everything becomes. Not just the absence of phone calls or text messages, but the absence of the background noise of belonging somewhere. No family group chat buzzing with inside jokes. No casual check-ins. No one wondering where you are or whether you've eaten today. Just you. a hotel room, and the sudden understanding that the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally actually loved you very, very conditionally. I spent the first 2 days just processing what had happened, playing it back like a movie, trying to figure out where I'd miscalculated, where I'd misread the situation so completely. Had they always been this cruel, and I'd just been too naive to see it? Or had my choice to pursue acting really changed them into people I didn't recognize? The answer, I was starting to realize, probably didn't matter. The result was the same either way. On the third day, I forced myself to leave the hotel room. Springfield in December isn't exactly a tourist destination, but it was still the town where I'd grown up. I drove around, rented a car because apparently I was an adult now, and adults solve their own transportation problems, looking at all the places that used to mean something to me. The high school where I'd discovered acting. The coffee shop where I'd spent hours memorizing lines for auditions my parents thought were a waste of time. The library where I'd researched colleges, back when I thought making my parents proud was the most important thing in the world. Everything looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically smaller, but less significant somehow. Like returning to a childhood home and realizing it was just a building, not the magical place that lived in your memories. I ran into Mrs. Patterson at the grocery store. She'd been my favorite teacher in high school, the one who'd encouraged me to audition for the lead in our senior play. "Elsie," she said, lighting up when she saw me. "I heard you were working in television now. How exciting." For a moment, I wondered how she'd heard. Then I realized, small town, proud teacher, probably bragging about her former student to anyone who would listen. "Thank you," I said. "It's been incredible." "Your parents must be so proud," she continued, and I felt my smile falter. "Yeah," I managed. "They're very proud." She chatted for a few more minutes about the show and how she couldn't wait to watch it, and I found myself almost crying right there in the cereal aisle. Not because of what my family had done to me, but because this woman who barely knew me was more excited about my success than the people who had raised me. That night, I called Marcus. "How's the family reunion going?" he asked, and I could hear party noise in the background. He was probably at some industry event in LA, surrounded by people who understood that acting was a real job that real people could succeed at. "It's going great," I lied. "Everyone's really supportive." Even as I said it, I knew he didn't believe me, but he was kind enough to pretend he did. After we hung up, I sat on the hotel bed and looked at my reflection in the mirror across from me. The girl staring back looked tired but not broken, hurt but not defeated. I was about to find out exactly how strong I really was. January 15th, the day Riverside Heights was set to premiere. I'd known this date for months, had been both dreading and anticipating it since the moment filming wrapped. In all my fantasies about this day, I'd imagined watching it with my family, seeing their faces when they realized what I'd accomplished, maybe even getting an apology for how they'd treated me. Instead, I was alone in a hotel room in my hometown, about to watch my professional debut while the people who were supposed to be my biggest supporters pretended I didn't exist. I'd thought about flying back to LA, or even going back to Vancouver where some of the cast was gathering for a watch party. But something kept me here, in this weird liminal space between my old life and my new one. Maybe I needed to see this moment through in the place where my dreams had first taken root, even if I was seeing it through alone. I ordered room service, champagne, and the fanciest thing on the menu, which turned out to be salmon with sides that cost more than I used to spend on groceries in a week, and settled in to watch my life change. The show opened with a sweeping shot of the fictional town of Riverside Heights, all tree-lined streets and perfect lawns hiding dark secrets. Then there I was, filling the screen in a way that still felt surreal after 8 months of filming. Rebecca Morrison, the character I'd put everything into bringing to life. Complicated, intelligent, vulnerable but strong, dealing with family dysfunction that felt uncomfortably familiar given my current circumstances. It was good, really good. Not just my performance, which I was too nervous to judge objectively, but the show itself. The writing was sharp, the other actors were phenomenal, and the story unfolded with exactly the kind of addictive quality that makes people clear their schedules for appointment television. When the first commercial break hit, I realized I'd been holding my breath. My phone was buzzing with notifications. Marcus texting from the LA watch party, Sarah sending encouraging emojis, even some of the crew members I'd stayed in touch with reaching out to say congratulations. But nothing from my family. Nothing from anyone in Springfield who might have recognized my name in the credits or my face on their TV screens. The second half of the episode was even better than the first. There was this scene where Rebecca finally stands up to her father, telling him that his approval isn't worth sacrificing her own happiness, and I watched myself deliver those lines with an intensity that came from a very real place. Art imitating life, or life giving weight to art. Either way, it was exactly what I needed to see in that moment. When the credits rolled, I sat in the silence of my hotel room and felt something I hadn't expected. Pride. Pure, uncomplicated pride in what I'd accomplished. I'd done it. I'd bet everything on myself and won. The next morning, I woke up to a world that had changed overnight. My phone was flooded with messages from people I hadn't heard from in months. College friends who'd seen the show, high school classmates who'd recognized me, even a few industry people who'd been watching and wanted to talk about future projects. And then, around 10 a.m., as I was checking out of the hotel, my phone rang with a number I recognized but hadn't seen in weeks. Mom. I stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. "Hello, Elsie," she said, and her voice was different than it had been 2 weeks earlier. Smaller, less certain. "We saw the show last night." "Oh," I said, because what else was there to say? You were really good. Really good. After months of telling me I was throwing my life away, suddenly I was really good. "Thank you," I said. "Listen," she continued. "Your father and we think maybe we were too hasty with what happened on your birthday. Too hasty. Like disowning your daughter was something you could accidentally do in a moment of poor judgment. We're at the hotel." Dad's voice joined the call. "In the lobby. We were hoping we could talk." I looked out my hotel room window and saw them down there, standing by the front desk, looking smaller and older than I remembered. "I'm actually leaving," I said. "My flight's in a few hours." "Please," Mom said, "just give us a few minutes." And there it was. The moment I'd been waiting for since December 20th. My parents asking for my time, wanting to talk to me, ready to admit they'd been wrong. The girl who'd arrived in Springfield 8 months after being rejected by her family would have run down to that lobby immediately, grateful for any crumb of acceptance they were willing to offer. But the woman who'd just watched herself succeed on national television had a different response. "I don't think so," I said. "But thank you for calling." I hung up before they could respond and finished packing my suitcase with hands that were steadier than I expected. Through the window, I could see them in the lobby, still waiting, probably expecting me to come down and gratefully accept whatever half-hearted apology they were prepared to offer. Instead, I called for a taxi. The ride to the airport was peaceful in a way I hadn't experienced since arriving in Ohio. No anxiety about what my family thought of me, no hope that this time would be different, no desperate need for their approval. Just me, my suitcase, and the absolute certainty that I was done trying to force people to love me on my own terms. My phone kept buzzing with calls from the same number. I turned it off. The flight back to LA felt different than any travel I'd done before. Not running toward something or away from something, but simply moving forward into a life that I was building entirely for myself. Marcus picked me up at LAX, his face lighting up when he saw me coming through the terminal. "There she is," he said, pulling me into a hug. "TV star. How was the watch party?" I asked as we walked toward his car. "Incredible. Everyone was texting about your performance. The producers are already talking about expanding Rebecca's storylines for season 2. He gave me a sideways look. "Speaking of which, how did your family react?" "They called," I said simply. And I didn't answer. Marcus nodded approvingly. "Good for you. Sometimes the best response to too little, too late is no response at all." Over the next few weeks, my phone continued to ring with calls from my parents. Voicemails that ranged from apologetic to confused to increasingly frustrated. When I still didn't respond, they tried different approaches. Emails, letters sent to my agent, even reaching out to friends from high school who might still have my current address. But I'd learned something important during my 8 months of silence followed by my birthday humiliation. Some bridges aren't worth rebuilding. Some relationships are only healthy when they end. The show was a massive success. Riverside Heights became the kind of cultural phenomenon that spawned think pieces and social media theories and actual academic analysis. Rebecca Morrison became a character that young women saw themselves in, quoted on Instagram, and wrote fan fiction about. And I became someone the industry wanted to work with. The offers started coming in almost immediately. Guest spots on other shows, auditions for films, meetings with producers who wanted to discuss projects specifically written for me. After years of hoping someone would give me a chance, I suddenly had the luxury of choosing between opportunities. 3 years later, I was sitting in my house in the Hollywood Hills. My house, bought with money I'd earned playing characters I loved, when my assistant brought me a stack of mail that included yet another letter from my parents. I almost threw it away unopened, like I had with all the others. But something made me pause, maybe curiosity about whether their approach had evolved at all. "Dear Elsie," it began, "we hope this letter finds you well. We've been following your career with great pride. Great pride. From the people who'd called me a failure to my face and laughed while they disowned me. We realize we made mistakes in how we handled your career choice, and we hope you'll consider giving us another chance to be part of your life. Another chance." As if what they'd done was a simple misunderstanding, rather than a calculated decision to hurt me as deeply as possible. We love you and miss you, and we hope that family can overcome any disagreement. Family, the same word they'd used to exclude me from their gathering, now being used to guilt me into forgetting how they'd treated me when I needed them most. I folded the letter carefully, walked to my fireplace, and dropped it into the flames. Some chances aren't worth giving. Some love comes too late to matter. I'd built a beautiful life without them, and I wasn't interested in going backward. 5 years after that birthday from hell, I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop in West Hollywood, reading a script for what would become my first lead role in a major motion picture, when a familiar name popped up on my phone. Not my parents this time, but my cousin Sarah, the one who'd been at the Disinheritance party, though she'd looked uncomfortable during the worst parts of it. "Elsie, it's Sarah. I know you probably don't want to hear from anyone in the family, but I thought you should know. Your dad's in the hospital." I felt that old familiar tightness in my chest, the one that used to appear whenever anything family-related came up. But it was fainter now, more like an old scar than a fresh wound. "What happened?" I asked. "Heart attack. He's stable, but it's been a rough few weeks. Your mom asked me to call. She didn't think you'd answer if it came from her directly." She was right. I wouldn't have. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I meant it. Whatever had happened between us, I didn't wish him actual harm. "They miss you, you know. Both of them. They talk about you all the time, about how proud they are of what you've accomplished." Proud. That word that meant everything to me when I was 21 and nothing to me now. "Sarah," I said gently, "I appreciate you calling. I really do. But that bridge burned a long time ago." "But he's your father." "No," I interrupted. "He made it very clear 5 years ago that he'd rather have no daughter than have me. He got what he wanted." There was a pause. "People change, Elsie. People grow up and realize their mistakes." "I'm sure they do," I said. "But some mistakes don't get to be undone just because you realize you made them." After we hung up, I sat in that coffee shop for a long time, watching people come and go, thinking about the girl I used to be and the woman I'd become. I thought about the daughter who would have dropped everything to rush to her father's bedside, desperate for any opportunity to reconcile. I thought about the version of this story where I would have gone back to Ohio, where we would have had some tearful reunion, where family love would have conquered all our differences. I thought about forgiveness and second chances, and all the beautiful narratives people tell themselves about family healing. And then I ordered another coffee and went back to reading my script. Some stories don't end with reconciliation. Some wounds don't heal just because time passes. Some relationships are healthiest when they exist only in the past tense. I'd grieved the family I thought I had and built a new life with people who supported my dreams from the beginning. I had Marcus, who'd become more of a brother than any blood relative ever was. I had Sarah from the show, who called me on my birthday every year to remind me how far I'd come. I had an entire chosen family of friends and colleagues who celebrated my successes and supported me through my struggles. I had love, real love, the kind that doesn't come with conditions or ultimatums or demands that I be someone other than who I am. And I had myself, the girl who'd been brave enough to bet everything on her dreams and wise enough to walk away from people who couldn't see her worth. 6 months later, I won my first Emmy. As I stood on that stage, holding the award and looking out at an audience full of people who understood what it meant to make art for a living, I felt a deep sense of completeness. In my acceptance speech, I thanked my castmates, my directors, my agent, and the fans who'd made Rebecca Morrison feel like a real person, rather than just a character. I didn't thank my family. I didn't send a message of forgiveness or reconciliation to people watching back in Springfield. Instead, I thanked the young dreamers who might be watching, who might be facing pressure to give up on their aspirations, who might need to hear that sometimes the people closest to you are the least qualified to judge your potential. "Trust yourself," I said into that microphone, speaking directly to the girl I used to be. "Your dreams are valid, your talent is real, and you don't need anyone's permission to become who you're meant to be." The applause was thunderous, but the real victory was the peace I felt saying those words. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories about finding the courage to choose yourself even when it costs you everything you thought you wanted. Sometimes the family that matters most is the one you build for yourself. I'm Elsie, 27, Emmy winner, and the daughter who learned that love without respect isn't love at all. And I've never been happier to be wrong about happy endings.